Why do people grow more conservative as they age? Probably because you get smarter. You want to know why people get more conservative? And like I got a bit more conservative, but like it doesn't mean you become a conservative. The reason people become more conservative as they grow up is because they have life experience and they realize that like the progressive narrative isn't as good as it sounds. It's ideally amazing. The ideals are amazing, but practically not so much, right? Like ideally, if we paid taxes and then we had particular support programs, like the world would be better. Unfortunately, like we're more complicated than that. People don't always utilize things like welfare programs in the most in the best interest of even themselves. A lot of times people will just leech the system. A lot of times the government will not do what you're asking them to do. They'll be corrupt. They'll fuck things up. Logistically, they can't handle things. And so like I've become more conservative in the sense where I believe less in like social programs, but more in redistribution of money for people to make their own decisions for that money. Right. So like rather than like free healthcare and free schooling and free this and free that, I'd rather implement things that would make these systems less expensive. And then I would implement the money for people to be able to afford them, right? So like I'm a universal basic income guy, like $1,000 a month to everybody. Not everybody's into that. A lot of conservatives are into a negative income tax where like you'll just get more money if you're poor on like a sliding scale. So rather than being taxed if you make under a certain amount of money or having no taxes, you'd have negative taxes. So you'd get money back on like a sliding scale. There's still the conditionality of getting more money if you're poorer, which is what I find to be a problem with our current welfare system, but it's not nearly as bad, and it gives people like personal accountability and personal choices. And people are like, well, what if poor people don't use it right? It's like, stop. Like the fact that you think poor people are so dumb is weird, and a lot of times the difference between a good and a bad choice is how much money you have left to recover from it. So I think that that's something that we have to acknowledge. Obviously systems aren't perfect. I'm not going to sit here and explain to you my UBI perspective. I have videos on it, but maybe I'll make a new update one. But that's how I become more conservative. It's like I believe in robust welfare programs that don't have the conditional effects of like, if you're poor, you get money, or if you have more babies, you get money, or if you're a single mom, you get more money. These things, it makes sense to implement them on paper because it's like, oh yeah, we want to help single mothers. But from an implementation perspective, it actually advocates for more single motherhood, more like deadbeat dads. It doesn't really help. And so that's why people get more conservative, and they go even further into a conservative sphere because they realize like the government is like mishandling a lot of money. So that's why people get more conservative. Life experience, honestly.
Around this time last year, there was a flash-in-the-pan controversy surrounding then-senior counselor to the president, Kellyanne Conway, and her 15-year-old daughter, Claudia. Kellyanne is a lifelong conservative, was previously Trump's campaign manager, and has spent her career as a general Republican Party strategist. Her time in the White House was marred with controversy, ranging from relatively benign misspeech, like the fictitious Bowling Green massacre, and stuff like alternative facts, to actually unethical violations of the 1939 Hatch Act, preventing members of the federal government from using the powers of their offices to influence elections or promote the businesses of family members of the president, both things that Kellyanne did repeatedly. During this 2020 Conway controversy, Kellyanne and her husband George requested that the media keep their children out of the limelight. After all, no matter what Kellyanne herself did, the kids aren't to blame, and it's kind of tacky to bring them into it. But Claudia Conway, having her own platform as a TikTok influencer, decided to speak up anyway, saying of her father, "You're just mad that I'm finally getting my voice heard," and sorry.
I mean, he's a 15-year-old idiot, to be honest. I watched some of the stuff.
Marriage failed. Claudia's channel at the time was full of Black Lives Matter, socialist, ACAB, and anti-Trump content. At one point she said, "If you're a woman supporting Trump, I feel bad for you. You must really hate yourself. Lots of internalized misogyny. Yikes."
See, that's like a dumb take, because here's the thing. This is something that I've noticed about conservatives as well, is that they're generally don't identify with their identities as much, right? So, and moderates do this as well. So, like a conservative woman doesn't see herself as a conservative woman. She sees herself as a person that's conservative. Whereas when you become more progressive, you'll usually identify more with being a woman. Generally, progressive people identify with their identities. Conservative people don't do that so much. So when you have a woman, like my mother is not a conservative. She's more of a moderate conservative. She voted for Trump because she wanted to see the economy brought back. And we could have a whole conversation about that Trump didn't do it perfectly, increase the annual federal deficit, blah, 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 blah. But the point is she did it so that we would have a stronger economy. She didn't do it because of like grab her by the pussy bullshit. Like, honestly, is it gross? Yeah. But like she wrote it off as locker room talk because like it kind of is that. right? It's different, but there's a difference between like saying like gross shit in private, which is still not right, and doing it publicly and like owning it. Be like, I loved it when I said that. You know, having really think about it. Imagine having all of your private conversations leaked. Of course, you're gonna look bad. There's things that you will all say. Some people are catty fucks and like talk shit about like their own family members. Or like their best friends will be like, oh, Courtney's such a stupid bitch. She has herpes. You understand what I'm saying? Everybody looks bad when their private conversations are released. So, you know, people just don't. Oh, my mom doesn't overly identify with being a woman. She's a manager. She ran like, she used to work for White Castle. She ran like 25 stores. You know what I mean? Like she doesn't give a shit about being a woman. She gives a shit about being a person. And that's usually like where conservatives come from. And that's not to dismiss progressives, because I think that there's a healthy amount of identifying with your identities that can be good for you. But you have to acknowledge that not everybody does.
Apparently meaning the message to be a jab at her mother. Afterward, Claudia announced that she was seeking legal emancipation from her parents. 6 months later, Claudia posted a series of secretly recorded videos where Kellyanne was insulting her, berating her, and hitting her.
One fucking bit for you to tell people I'm a bitch.
What?
What?
There's something wrong with you.
Yeah,
You're mocking me.
You think I'm mocking you? I'm trying to have a conversation with you.
Where's the hitting part?
Do you know what you've done to yourself?
I'm 15.
No. Fucking immature. For you getting all over the sheets that I cleaned.
Can you stop?
No, you don't ignore me. Asshole. Get my mom things!
Can you please, Mom?
No, you can't! I want you out of here! You were making you mad. Some 15-fucking-year-old made you mad.
These videos went viral. And
what the fuck? I mean, there's really no context that looks good in. But I didn't see like any active hitting. It seemed more like throwing things at people. It's still really shitty, and the mom's obviously an asshole. But it's surprisingly common for daughters and like mothers to be toxic towards each other, which I didn't even know. Because my mother was even like, yeah, like my mom is a very, like we have, our relationship with my mom has like never been like toxic or anything. But she's like, yeah, my mom and me were very toxic. My fiance and her mom are toxic. It's just kind of the truth. So like, I don't know. I have no personal experience here, but it's true. You know, daughters and mothers are assholes to each other. So, you know, and obviously Kellyanne Conway is trying to, or like the daughter's trying to set up like a frustration thing to make, or she's trying to elicit a response from her mother. So I'm just saying.
Shortly afterward, a topless picture of Claudia was posted to Kellyanne's official Twitter account.
What the
Keep in
fuck?
mind that she's still 16 at this point, and the picture is quickly deleted. We
Why?
also posted that pic, whether it was Kellyanne going even more off the rails, or Claudia framing her mom, or some.
There's no way that the mother put her own fucking daughter's tits up on Insta or whatever, Twitter. Jesus Christ.
Some hacker fucking around, or what? The only thing we do know is that Claudia had taken a topless pic of herself, and for some reason that picture made its way to Kellyanne's account. Of course, the police got involved, and since then the drama has seemed to calm down. Kellyanne is still posting about her politics. Claudia is still on TikTok, but only posting vapid teenager shit. But the political drama has basically disappeared. If I had to guess, Claudia is just biding her time until she can move out. It's a strange story because any sane person who watches these TikToks sees that Kellyanne is treating her daughter like shit. At the same time, Claudia's living up that party lifestyle. Drinking on the beach, driving around with her boyfriend in nice cars, appearing on TV.
Hi. Are you okay?
Yeah, it sounds like a privileged loser. Like, honestly. Like, the mom's a loser and the daughter's a loser. That's my perspective. Like, you know, a lot of it is performative activism so that like people get social clout. You want to know why she stopped posting political stuff? Because Trump's not in office anymore, and the political scene is like not in tune. It's not like in season anymore. So you're not going to get as much clout off of screaming Black Lives Matter, which is what a lot of privileged progressives did. I'm not saying that Black Lives Matter is invalidated, but like it was tokenized by people like Claudia Conway.
No. No, but yes.
Yes and no.
Yeah.
She's a stereotypical Stacey with a Chad BF, and somebody's got to be paying for all this shit. Also, even though she makes fun of OnlyFans for trying to recruit her on Twitter, she really seems to be easing into an
Bro, I don't want to see this.
It almost seems
this
like
girl's like fucking, how old is this girl where I'm seeing her fucking tits? This is disgusting. There's no way she's older than like 6. She's fucking 16. Whoa, Jesus Christ. First of all, I doubt OnlyFans reached out to her to have her make porn. Second of all, stop showing me a fucking 16-year-old's tits. This is disgusting, bro.
Kids are grooming themselves for porn nowadays.
And they're not grooming themselves. They're like other like OnlyFans people are grooming kids into thinking OnlyFans is a viable option. It's okay if you want to do that kind of sex work when you become of age. Most people don't. They do it for financial reasons. And like you're grooming kids into thinking that that's a viable option. And it's like long term. It's not. Like, you know, it's not. It's full of like mental frustrations, and you're gonna need to work on top of that. Most people anyway.
Fucking hell. The point is, this may be an extremely public, high-profile case, but it's something that a lot of progressive kids with conservative parents seem to be relating to right now. Remember this story? Teresa Duke got slugged in the face during the January 6th Capitol riots, and her lesbian, disowned daughter, Helena Duke, retweeted the video saying, "Hi mom, remember when you told me I shouldn't go to BLM protests because they could get violent? Is this you?" And it's like, fair enough.
Show me the mom getting
She's got
punched.
you there, mom. Teresa ended up losing her job over this, and Helena has since moved away to the big city, where she now lives with her girlfriend, talking about going to the hospital because she cut herself while trying to slice an avocado, and how she wants to live in a commune because fuck capitalism, am I right? This is a common enough thing. Conservative parents that are legitimately shitty to their kids, and radicalized young leftist activists.
I don't think it's like that common. I feel like you're looking at like social media activist bullshit. Like, I don't think most conservative parents are like horribly abusive to their kids.
Their parents as
or
literally hit them,
conservative.
cutting them off, moving out of their small town, and then end up becoming extremists in their own right, only for the other team. It seems to be crazier now more than it's ever been, but this effect has been seen for a while. Old people look down on young people as lacking experience or knowledge.
Well,
or
that's
wisdom.
true.
Young people look down on old people for being too ancient in their thinking and
That's
not
true
updating
too,
their
yeah.
mental models to fit the current paradigm. On some level, they're both correct. Young people think they're the vanguard of a new society, and as soon as the last old people are finally gone, they can remake things in their image. Old people think that the kids are just being rowdy, and they'll settle down.
Yeah, my mom's more conservative. I'm more progressive. I think it comes down to more when people like force their political ideologies onto their kids. That was where it becomes a problem. And there's a difference between like talking about politics with like your children and like forcing your ideologies on them. My mom never forced her ideologies onto me.
And become more conservative as they age, as that age makes them tougher and more competent. And again, on some level, they're both correct. That is some commonly repeated folk wisdom, by the way, that people get more conservative as they age. Well, how true is it, actually?
It seems to be true.
Conservatives love to lean on common sense in their online discussions, while progressives will often pull out this study. Do people really become more conservative as they age? Yeah, I had a double take on it too. It's Jonathan Peterson, not Jordan Peterson. But because it's online discussions, progressives rarely read past this sentence in the abstract. Consistent with previous research, but contrary to folk wisdom, our results indicate that political attitudes are remarkably stable over the long term. Of course, the very next sentence reads, in contrast to previous research, however, we also find support for the folk wisdom. On those occasions where political attitudes do shift across the lifespan,
you know
liberals
what?
are more likely to become conservatives than conservatives are to become liberals, suggesting that folk wisdom has some empirical basis even as it overstates the degree of change.
So that's an interesting point because it says consistent with previous research. Our results indicate that political attitudes remain the same, but there's also credibility to the idea that people become more conservative. What that says to me is that people are generally consistent in their perspectives, but their perspectives but their perspectives start to become seen as conservative because the social landscape shifts, right? So 10 years ago, if I had like my take was I think we should implement universal basic income, I would be seen as like a fucking communist. 10 years later, where we are now, I'm not seen as like a communist as much. Progressive ideas become more palatable, so the people promoting those progressive ideas, they remain the same, but that idea becomes more conservative as we get closer to it like being more normalized, if that makes any sense, right? Like 50 years ago, socialized healthcare was like a no-no. It's like, oh my god, you communists, kill yourself. Now it's like, oh, we're getting close to universal healthcare, so you're not as progressive for supporting universal healthcare as you used to be. So the ideas themselves remain the same, it seems, but where they fall on the scale of or the spectrum of progressive to conservative, that is what changes. That's what this suggests to me more than anything else.
In other words, people aren't likely to change over time, but if they do change, there's a higher chance they become more conservative. The study itself describes the various reasons as to why this might be the case. Firstly, there's psychological factors. The tendency for age to bring with it increasing self-discipline and self-sufficiency, preference for order, avoidance of uncertainty, capacity to remember emotionally laden stimuli, and alterations in neural structures that come with aging. This also correlates with our understanding of fluid and crystallized intelligence. Fluid intelligence slowly declines as we age, and we can observe this in a gradual drop-off of IQ across a person's life, while crystallized intelligence remains constant. Our ability to learn new things slowly disappears. The things that we've already learned stick with us right up to the end, seemingly providing evidence for the idea that old people appear to be stuck in their ways. The aging study also mentions that social aging plays a role. Your social circle is primarily friends and peers and romantic partners sometimes, up until you start a family, and then it shifts to a more localized circle of
unless you're a gross older TikToker,
members and work acquaintances. And then all social interaction drops off rapidly after retirement and the kids have left the nest.
True.
There seems to be a correlation between the loss of naivete and idealism with the adoption of more and more responsibility as we grow older. This view seems to be be congruent with another paper, ideological differences in the expanse of the moral circle. And yes, that's the actual Jonathan Haidt involved this time. By the way, because these are all American studies, they use liberal to refer to left and conservative to refer to right. I hate how Americans have ruined language. Liberals, progressives, and socialists are not the same thing. But the point is, the more leftward people go, the more likely it is that they prioritize friends over family, and the planet over the nation. And the more rightward people go, the opposite effect happens. For example, the love of friends remains constant across the political spectrum, but love of family goes up on the right, and love of world goes up on the left.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Such that on the extreme left, people slightly prefer the planet over their friends, and both significantly more than their family. You can chart a similar trend between nationalist and globalist values. You can even show that the extreme left slightly prefers non-human life over human life, while the rest of the spectrum in the center left prefers humanity. The most telling part of the study,
Jesus Christ, it sounds like these leftists are a little spooky,
in my opinion, is this heat map. Each person was given 100 moral units to assign to 16 areas of concern, represented by these 16 concentric circles, with each circle being a slightly more universalized area of concern than the previous. Circle 1, right in the center, is all of your immediate family. Circle 2 is your extended family. Circle 3 is your close friends. Then your distant friends, your acquaintances, all the people
this makes sense.
All citizens of your country, all people on your continent, all humans, all mammals, all animals, all living things on Earth, including amoeba, all animals in the universe, including undiscovered alien life, all living things in the universe, including alien amoeba, plants, and trees, all things in the universe, including non-living things like space rocks, and finally, the universe itself.
This makes a lot of sense. I think this is very telling. So this is very telling for a lot of people. Let's just bring it to like Black Lives Matter and White Lives Matter rhetoric. While like conservatives, they don't really care about things outside of their social sphere as much, so they don't understand the issues of other communities. So they'll say like all lives, some of them are just racist pieces of shit, obviously, but a lot of them are just like, I don't understand Black Lives Matter because like they don't matter more than my life. And it's like, well, that's not what Black Lives Matter is. Black Lives Matter is just about how black people's lives matter as much, but people don't understand those experiences and they don't see the experience, and they have difficulty empathizing with people outside of their sphere. And so like that's where the rhetoric comes from for most conservatives, I think, is it comes from a lack of like knowledge and experience and understanding of other people's issues.
Each participant had to divide up their 100 moral units to each of these 16 areas of concern. The heat map shows that the conservatives, on average, place the majority of their moral units on circles 3 and 4, their close and distant friends, while liberals place the majority of theirs on circle 14, all living things in the universe, including alien amoeba, plants, and trees.
Fuck that shit. Honestly, fuck that shit. That's one of those things where like I can understand like other lives mattering, but like outside of the human race or whatever species, what the fuck it's called, but you know, fuck aliens, bro. You know, if you looked at the theory for aliens, like if there are aliens that can find us, we would just be dead already. Like, so, because they're going to either like harvest our world. Like, there's very low likeliness that they'll come here to be like, oh, let's support Earth, you know?
Moreover, conservatives were more likely to spread their moral units out a little bit more than the liberals, with the highest value on the liberal heat map being 20 units in one location, while the highest value on the conservative heat map was 12. The liberals were more likely to crowd their moral units on the more universalist domains, while the conservatives crowded them on localist ones. Comparing the extremes, your average conservative cares more about his immediate family and his close friends than the universe or any random amoeba in it, and your average liberal cares about the inverse. More about the universe and its random amoeba than his immediate family or close friends. And even though humans do actually only have so much moral consideration to pass around, just to ensure that their results weren't the product of artificially limiting the amount of concern they have at 100 units, they replicated the test with an infinite amount of moral units. And despite it being infinite, the distribution ended up the same. Putting aside the more obvious implications of this study for now, this lines up with the aging study's assertion that your moral concerns change as your social circles do. When you're young and moving around for work or school and traveling a lot and living this cosmopolitan lifestyle where you form no real lasting social bonds, your moral attention will be allocated more towards universalist concerns. When you're a bit older, you have a family and a house and a job, your moral attention will be allocated towards more localist concerns. And since moral attention correlates with political leanings, it's no surprise that living a more normal life would make people more conservative. The aging study also brings up some more obvious points. An older person who has had a successful career has seen his wealth grow over time due to that hard work, and 1, doesn't want his wealth to be stolen by redistributive efforts, and 2, doesn't understand the complaints of the poor young person, because he was also once a poor young person and he worked and made money. So they too will work and make money. Being poor and young and then older with money is exactly how you want a functioning society to work. It means that you're able to produce the necessary excess resources for your future self to live on when you can't work anymore. However, the aging study does bring up one good point against the trending conservative hypothesis, that older people have more health problems, and therefore that need might drive people towards more left-leaning redistributive policies concerning universal health care or social security as they get older. At this point, the aging study spends an entire page getting into the nitty-gritty of citing and explaining many other studies, most of which conclude that political views remain generally stable over time. This view lines up with the conclusion of a completely different paper, Genetic influences on political ideologies. Here, an aggregation of twin studies was used to determine that between 30 to 60% of the variance in social and political attitudes can be explained by genetic influences, but also that the search for a politics gene was fruitless, because thousands of genes influence the biological component of a person's natural
I've heard that before too.
It seems that,
and that's interesting, like that having a level of that your biology playing a factor in like the way that you think politically. I mean, it shows us that like whether you like it or not, you need to empathize with the other side and like come to conclusions or compromises, because this is how we're gonna live. Unless you're gonna like wipe out half the population. I know I'm simplifying that. You're gonna have to learn to deal with conservatives, and conservatives have to learn to deal with like progressives. Like you're just going to have to do that.
speaking very generally, a
'Cause they're
significant portion
people.
of our politics comes from our biology, and also that our politics are not likely to change across our lifespan. Let's look at the aging studies data. When people's political attitudes did change, they were more likely to change between the ages of 26 to 35 rather than 36 to 50. The only statistically
sense.
significant political change from 36 to 50 was the ideological label people identified as publicly, rather than any policy position. In other words,
That's fair.
when
That makes
people
sense,
do
too.
become more conservative as they age, they're more likely to adopt conservative positions between 26 to 35, but not actually likely to identify as a conservative until between 36 to 50. This lines up with the adoption of responsibility.
That makes sense, because like my viewpoints like haven't changed very much over like the past however many years. Like ever since I was introduced to universal basic income, like I've been pretty consistent on like the way that I feel society should operate. If anything, I felt like more ostracized from progressive circles, because progressives I find that like people that are more like leftist and progressive and whatnot, those people are super toxic. And like I've had conversations with conservatives about UBI, and they're open to it, even if they don't agree. But like I've talked to leftists about it, and they'll fucking melt down. I had a conversation with a person, and I said like I'm for universal healthcare, but I think we should do a slow transition and like maintain a private option. And like that was like a mortal sin. And they passed around a bunch of like incorrect logic about how universal healthcare will be cheaper, and like a bunch of like things that are just not true, that they've been proven to not be true. And I was like, bro, I just want like a reasonable transition, because like some people like private insurance, and they're like, no, like it's very gatekeepy in like the progressive sphere and like the very leftist sphere, where if you slightly disagree with somebody, you should need to kill yourself. In conservatives though, like I noticed that you can disagree on a lot of things, and like you're still fairly like friendly with each other. That's my anecdotal experience, at least. But I feel like that's a pretty common perspective.
And the changing of social circles that we talked about earlier, but it also lines up with Piaget's stages of cognitive development. Piaget developed this theory by noticing that children were not just tiny adults, but actually thought in fundamentally different ways than adults. He identified 4 stages of cognitive development: sensory motor, which ranges from birth to 2 years, pre-operational, which is 2 to 7, concrete operational, which is 7 to 11, and formal operational, which is 12 to the end of puberty and beginning of concrete adulthood, which is variable and happens all over the 20s. We're concerned with the formal operational stage, 12 to adulthood. This is where the person finally shows the beginning of fully abstract thinking, and undergoes a general awakening to the existence of morality, philosophy, ethics, and politics. Piaget referred to this stage colloquially as the Messianic Stage, as what often comes with it is a desire to change the world for the better. And that makes sense to me. Of course, a thinking being's first encounter with morality, philosophy, ethics, and politics would be to use their newfound skills to notice problems and feel a desire to fix them. You'd have to be a sociopath not to feel that way, I think. Jens Rogman from the University of Hamburg published a series of notes for a future study that is unfortunately not finished yet, talking in detail about the Messianic Stage. Young people are prone to adopt idealistic and utopian ideologies, which they reassert with an almost religious fanaticism. But due to their lack of experience and their egocentric worldview, they tend to underestimate the difficulties of implementing their ideas while being blind to the backlash of their attempts in a real-world setting.
I think that's like the biggest thing that I focus on, is like how like that's like that really resonates. Like they're just not very idealistic they're very idealistic perspectives that don't have like a lot of practicality in their implementation, which is why you see so many young communists. Unfortunately, conservatives, instead of going, this is a problem, let's find a solution, a lot of conservatives are just like, fuck it, instead, as their reaction. But yeah, no, I noticed that there's a lot of idealistic perspectives, and like that's where the real world experience, like, oh, okay, like communism theoretically is amazing, but like it's just not going to happen, because there are people who are just better than other people. Okay, if you've ever looked at any redneck in the world, you go like, oh, that guy is worthless. I'm just kidding. But like there are people I'm just kidding. But there are people who are more beneficial to society, whether it's because of genetics or because of the way that they were brought up. They have more of a contribution. The person that knows how to work on computers is going to be more beneficial than the person who worked as like a fast food worker for their whole life. And I'm not saying that we should get rid of those people. Like they should have a place in our society, and we need to raise our poverty floor. But like communism is, from what has been proposed, is going to value everybody the same. So like what's the incentive to utilize your potential of being better for society? There is none.
Does this sound familiar to you yet? We've all had that socialist roommate who wanted to implement broad sweeping changes to reorder the world, but somehow that
True.
never actually extended to him doing his own dishes. And of course,
Bro, oh, it's like Hassan, who talks about how Amazon's horrible, but then like makes a contract with Twitch, which is owned by Amazon, instead of like going to a different streaming service and protesting Amazon because he's like a performative activist bullshit asshole. Yeah, that sounds exactly like it.
we've all seen its inverse too. The old Fox News watching aunt who loves her family dearly, but blames all of society's problems on those damn immigrants. Everything I've
True.
talked about
Fuck
today
those immigrants.
seems
I'm
to
kidding.
point at one conclusion. While leftists and rightists both have their blind spots, the problems associated with leftism are correlated with youth, simultaneously its desire for change and its lack of discipline, while the problems with rightism are correlated with age, its inability to adopt new information or understand problems
You
larger
seem
than a
very
local
fair.
scale. Going back to the aging study, we can really hammer this point home. When movement does occur with age, the bias is towards a more conservative ideological posture. This is apparent both in moderates, where those moderates who did change were 3 times more likely to become conservatives than to become liberals, as well as in the imbalance of ideological movement for liberals and conservatives. 34% of liberals at age 26 were conservatives at 50, but only 19% of the inverse. But these numbers still leave a large chunk of people who don't change politically at all, and as the study has repeatedly said, for most people, political viewpoint is relatively stable over time. However, and right now this is just my own hypothesis, I'm just spitballing here. We all know the left has been pushing the Overton window in their direction more and more. I'm sure we've all felt that feeling of being left behind by the left as they radicalize further. I'm sure we all experienced how our normal center-left opinions suddenly in a flash became conservative ones. I know the online communists think I'm a Nazi, even though I've never actually changed my political beliefs. I'm sure we've all lost friends at this point because they radicalized and you didn't. I've certainly made multiple videos about it myself. The people who view the left-right scale as a sliding scale of good and evil view the extreme left as history's natural endpoint, and that the arrow of progress points eternally leftward over time. If you actually believe this, then forcing politics more leftward makes sense to you. It may be the case that in our current era of rapid political change, even those large swaths of people who don't become conservatives may nonetheless be labeled as them. It certainly explains why the radical progressives see the far right everywhere, even though almost none of them actually exist anymore. I'm not saying that people like Claudia Conway or Helena Duke don't have a point. They obviously do. When parents do bad things to their kids, even in the name of conservatism, even if that conservatism was predetermined by their genetics, even if that conservatism is a natural end result of life itself, that doesn't excuse those bad things. But the young leftist who moves out of their small town and away from their icky MAGA parents also doesn't really hold the high ground. What they're doing is also probably predetermined by their genetics, or is a natural end result of the current stage of development that they're on. The problem with everything I've talked about so far is that nothing here actually determines what is correct. Just because that when people change due to age, they're more likely to become conservative, and that change is more likely to be correlated with wisdom.
This guy looks
experience,
kind of
and
like me and
adoption
it's
of
bothering the
responsibility,
fuck out of
doesn't
me.
mean that the conservative position is correct all the time. Just because young people are likely to feel the drive to be revolutionaries, and that drive is likely to be directly correlated to and simultaneously fouled up by their own inexperience, lack of deep ties to the world, and irresponsible lifestyle, that doesn't mean that history will move leftward over time because the old people will die off and the leftists will rule everything. In the real world, sometimes
Someone's like, you can tell Papa's reading the chat and he's confused. Yeah, you guys are talking about fucking alien, big goth, big titty fucking mommy aliens. I'm very confused.
Of
Of course.
Sometimes the conservative is correct. It depends on the situation. It depends on the people involved. Progressives tend to think that they will conquer society because of their utopian vision and history is on their side. Conservatives tend to think that the kids don't know anything and need to stop mouthing off. But it seems to be that becoming more conservative over time, while not guaranteed, does happen more often than the inverse, and seems to happen partially because of the biology of the person, and partially because of the practical effects of the adoption of responsibility, the cultivation of meaningful personal relationships, and general maturation. And when the inverse happens, when people become more progressive over time, when they have that glow up as a response of moving away and getting out from under the thumb of their oppressive parents,
What the hell's going on here, bro? What are you doing, dude?
that also seems to correlate with the lack of responsibility,
The hell
the
are
lack
you
of
doing,
meaningful
dude?
relationships, and the lack of maturity. In other words, if you're a leftist and you decide to self-improve, the data shows that you probably won't change political alignment at all. But if on the off chance you do happen to change, it will likely be a shift rightward, because the lifestyle that fosters leftism
Hey, thank you
is
so much
not
for the sub,
compatible
man.
with the lifestyle
Realmo4
that
just
fosters self-improvement.
subscribed.
That about does it for me, guys. Thank you for
I
watching.
missed what he said in the last part.
Leftism is not compatible with the lifestyle that fosters self-improvement. That about does it for me, guys. Thank you for watching. I hope you now understand why I've been gone so long. I've been doing a lot of reading. As always,
Very cool, Mar. I like that video. It's pretty poggers.